So that's the first thing, be present. Listen to understand my experience. Ask me curious questions. Don't try to fix. I'm not coming to you to talk about these things for any kind of fixing. I'd just really love for you to listen and then to share back to me, like what it was you learned about me or what it was like listening to me. And if you do that, I'm going to know that you were listening and it's going to make me feel like you've understood me.
That
And so with a bit
framework
of a
is
recipe like that, yeah. And though that way, when we know what it is that our partner wants to give us, and we think, I can do that. Like, we want to make our partner feel good. We want to meet their needs. It's just we get scared if we don't know what that means or if we're feeling criticized.
Welcome to Vaginas, Vulvas, and Vibrators with Jordan Donnell. This is a safe place to learn about women's health and sexual wellness. I'm your host, Jordan Donnell, physician assistant, women's sexual health educator, and intimacy coach. All right, welcome back to the Vaginas, Vulvas, and Vibrators podcast. Today we have Jodie Milton here. She is a women's relationship and intimacy coach and the co-creator of Practical Intimacy, a relationship blog that has helped over 2 million readers. I am so excited to chat with you today about emotional intimacy. This is one of the topics that I think comes up a lot for people. What the hell is it really? Like, how do we create it? And how much it impacts our relationships. So I'm so excited to dive into all of that with you today. Before we get into our conversation, I'd love for you to just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this work.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks for having me. So this work for me really started about 12 years ago in what I would call now my quarter life crisis. That was not a term I was familiar with back then, but it's gained a lot of popularity because I think a lot of us millennials have gone through it. And I think Gen Z as well, like the quarter life crisis. And so for me, what that looked like, it wasn't I woke up one day, but it was definitely an intense 6 months of my life where I realized I was miserable and burnt out in my job. I was completely disconnected from my body and was starting to have like panic attacks and weird symptoms going on. And, doctors couldn't tell me what it was. It was anxiety. I was really lost in my relationship. I didn't know who I was anymore. And I was like secretly resenting my partner for it. I was just slowly watching my life unravel. So in order to deal with that, I don't recommend this strategy, but I just kind of blew up my life. I quit my job. I ended my relationship. I put my house on the market. I was like, it's just burn it all to the ground. It's all got to go. And I swore I'd never be in a long-term relationship again. I was like, love can't last, can't make it work. And of course, the universe has a sense of humor. And that's when I got into a relationship with my now husband. And it was one of those moments where I was like, look, I had planned to be doing all the personal development work. Like, I wasn't ready for this. This isn't going to work. Like, at the same time, there's something here. Like, we couldn't deny that we both wanted to see where this would take us, but we had both had that experience of losing ourselves in our relationship. So we thought, let's give it a go, but let's do it right. And so we embarked on this journey of learning everything we could about relationships, everything we could about long-term success in a relationship, how to have a thriving, satisfying sex life that lasts beyond the honeymoon phase. I still did do a lot of personal development work because I did have my own stuff to work on, but I learned how to do that within the container of a relationship, which was something I didn't think I could do. And so after a few years of like literally traveling the world together and like studying Tantra, studying sexual Taoism, taking courses from the Gottman Institute, like reading all the books, we kind of got to a point where we felt really confident with what we had created in our relationship. And I had a background in education and it just felt so natural for me to want to share this with other people. And so we started our blog, started coaching, and then 10 years later, here we are.
I love that. I was laughing at your story because I currently feel like I'm in a quarter life crisis and ready to burn everything to the fucking ground. And it's funny though, because this happened a few years ago too. Like, it continually happens. So I was just laughing because it is so relatable. And Yeah, I love this story of how you guys really just went deep dived into relationships and how to create a
Mm.
successful relationship. And from that, that's what you really built your relationship on. Is that correct?
Yes. Like for us, we kind of wanted to have an intentional relationship. Sometimes people call it a conscious relationship, as opposed to falling into a relationship or having the kind of relationships that we see in the media or maybe that we grew up seeing. Like they're not necessarily the models that we wanted. And so we wanted to consciously craft something ourselves. But we also wanted to really hold on to our sense of self. So we really like wanted to balance this concept of how do I be my truest, most self-expressed self while still being in close proximity with another person, while still having an amazing relationship. And over the last 10 years, like the key themes that have emerged for us are around like really being yourself in your relationship. We call it differentiation, but also really focusing on the core ingredients of a healthy relationship, which we believe are emotional intimacy and sexual intimacy.
Mm. So, what does emotional intimacy mean to you?
Yeah, I love this question because emotional intimacy really is a core craving of humans. Like it's kind of wired within us to want deep connection with someone. So emotional intimacy is that profound feeling of connection you experience with someone when you reveal your true self and they meet you in that. It's that sense of being deeply seen, heard, understood, and known by another person and feeling that you see and know the real them as well. And as social beings, like we crave this on such a deep level, and yet it's often not something we put language to. So people will hear the word emotional intimacy and think, gee, what is that? But when I talk about what it is, people go, oh my gosh, yes, I want that. I crave that. I love that because it's an incredibly profound experience. And it's one we can have with our partner, yes, in a relationship, but it's one that we can have with a friend. It's one we can have with family. It's because it's something that we are literally wired to experience, but we're not necessarily taught the skills of how to do it. Like, even though we're wired for it and we crave it, we don't necessarily have the skills to create it effectively.
How do you create emotional intimacy?
Yeah, there's a few key ingredients. One is what we call vulnerable self-disclosure. So sharing things about yourself, and they have to be vulnerable. So it has to be something that's meaningful. So that can be thoughts, feelings, it can be fears, dreams, desires, but it's something that feels real and maybe a little edgy, maybe not something that the entire world would necessarily see. And so from that, in order to be able to do that, another really important ingredient is safety, emotional safety, and that feeling that you can open up to this person and they won't judge you. They'll accept you. They'll love you. And they'll hold that vulnerable self-disclosure with the respect and care that it deserves. And then the third ingredient is that like receptive other, that ability for whoever you're sharing yourself with to really make you feel seen, to make you feel heard. It's where, active listening comes into play, but it's more than that. Like you have to be able to validate this experience and show that you've gotten this person.
So, how does emotional intimacy impact our sexual relationships?
So many different ways. For women, especially, quite often they'll say they need that emotional connection in order to want to have sex. And that, because especially when we think of arousal and desire, we know that women tend to be more responsive with their desire. And so one of the things that helps to turn off the brakes and hit the accelerator for desire and arousal is emotional connection. When you feel close to someone, you trust them, you feel that you can open up to them, like literally let them inside your body, to be with you in a really vulnerable, intimate way. And so often it's a prerequisite. And women will say, like, I especially in relationships, I see this where they're not wanting to have sex with their partner because they're feeling resentment or they're feeling unappreciated or they're feeling unseen. And so it's really core for women in order to want to open up. Having said that, there's a huge kind of generalization that I'd like to call out. And that's that, men do also want that emotional connection, right? Often we'll find that for men, the reason they want sex is because it creates that emotional connection for them. And it's often one of the few areas in their lives where they get to experience that feeling. And we find across the board when we ask both men and women, what is it that you're craving from sex? Like, why do you want to have sex? Without fail, the most common answer for both, in fact, we hear it every single time, is connection. They're craving that emotional intimacy. So it can both be the prerequisite for sexual connection and the very reason we have sex itself.
That's interesting. And it makes sense though, too, that like men and women are seeking different things in the same thing in different ways.
In different ways. Totally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if you're wanting to create emotional intimacy, where do you begin? Like for many of us, this isn't something that we just innately know or know where to start. So like, where would you begin if you had a partner that you're maybe not feeling connected to?
A really important place to start is actually knowing yourself and getting in touch with your own feelings, thoughts, desires, fears, because you can't share yourself with someone else if you're not in touch with that first. And so a very safe place to start is journaling or reflecting, like, what are the parts about myself that I wish other people knew? What are the things that are currently on my mind? What am I looking forward to in my life? What am I struggling with? What are the things that I wish people knew about me? Specifically, if you're in a relationship, it's, what is it that I wish my partner knew? What is it that I wish that they saw about me? And you can then take some of those little pieces and sit down and have a conversation with your partner and share some of these things that are on your mind. Now, that conversation may need some framing, right? So just to like show up one day sitting at the dinner table, like, okay, so recently, I've been feeling these incredible desires to travel around the world and I'm really missing friends or, whatever this big revelation is. Without any context, your partner might be like, whoa, what's going on here? Like, slow down. So an important place to start is to just express a desire to connect with your partner more deeply and to share that you would like to foster more emotional intimacy in your relationship, that you would like to feel closer to them. And that a way you might like to do that is by carving out time. It doesn't have to be a lot of time, it might be 30 minutes once a week to sit down and just have a more intentional conversation that's focused less on what's going on in our lives and the details of what's happening at work or what's happening with the kids, but to really talk about how you're feeling as a person and what's going on in your inner world.
And I think that so often sharing that is a really great opportunity to connect, but like it's really scary. So how do you approach that if maybe your partner isn't open to it?
Yeah, I think when we look at it, it's like, why might a partner not be open to emotional intimacy? And it's going to be their own fears and concerns. So that maybe they might feel criticized when you come to them and say, hey, we're not feeling connected. I don't feel close to you. I want more emotional intimacy. It's really common for the partner to hear, I'm not really happy. You're not doing it right. Like, I'm not satisfied in this relationship. I need more from you. And that can be really triggering. And that can really put up our defenses. And especially if they don't know what you're asking for, right? Emotional intimacy, like, God, I don't even know what that means. You're asking something of me that I don't know how to give you. And again, that can really cause them to put up their defenses. And so if you think that your partner may be resistant to this, it can be helpful to get really clear on what emotional intimacy means to you, what practically that might look like, and the role that you want them to play, so that you give them the recipe for success, so that they feel like, okay, I can do this. I understand what it is that you want from me. So the key thing ultimately with emotional intimacy, too, either they're receiving or they're listening or they're talking. And we do need to do both. To feel connected in our relationships, we do both need to be sharing and listening. But let's say you first want them to just listen. Let them know what good listening means to you. So it's saying like, hey, I want to emotionally connect with you. I really want to foster emotional intimacy. not because you're doing anything wrong, not because there's anything wrong with our relationship. It's actually because I love you and I just want to feel closer to you. I love you and I just want to spend more time with you. So you can kind of reassure them at the same time as making that request. And then saying, like, all I want you to do is listen, like, let's turn off our phones, let's get present, let's turn off the TV, let's really carve out time where we can be with each other. So that's the first thing, be present. Listen to understand my experience. Ask me curious questions. Don't try to fix. I'm not coming to you to talk about these things for any kind of fixing. I'd just really love for you to listen and then to share back to me, like, what it was you learned about me or what it was like listening to me. And if you do that, I'm going to know that you were listening and it's going to make me feel like you've understood me.
That
And so with a bit
framework
of a
is,
recipe like that, yeah.
that's great.
Yeah. And though that way, when we know what it is that our partner wants to give us, and we think, I can do that. Like, we want to make our partner feel good. We want to meet their needs. It's just we get scared if we don't know what that means or if we're feeling criticized.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. How does emotional intimacy evolve within a relationship? Because I would assume that it doesn't stay the same and that it is going to kind of vary at different stages and also based on what's going on within the relationship as well.
Yeah. I mean, the capacity you have for any priority in your life is going to ebb and flow, right? Like, you'll have time when you're in your work season and it's all about doing the things and hitting the goals and like upskilling, right? You'll have other times when you're all about your relationship and you're doing the work and you're really carving out time for each other. And so it's unrealistic to think all of the time in our relationship we're going to be maximally emotionally connected, right? Usually when we're first falling in love, that first, heady honeymoon phase, there's a lot of emotional intimacy. There's a lot of connection. Like, that's part of what falling in love feels like, is that sense of, oh my gosh, I'm looking into the world of this person and they're amazing. And oh my God, they're looking into my inner world and I feel so special. Like, that's part of what we love about that experience. And as we know, like, that can't last for a number of reasons, that intensity. But emotional intimacy itself is a thread that can be weaved through your entire relationship. But you'll have times when you're more available for that and times when you're less available for that. And that's okay. We don't want to put unrealistic expectations on a relationship or shame those moments when we are experiencing disconnection. It happens in all relationships, happens in my relationship. I teach this stuff and my husband and I will still have times when we're not super emotionally connected. That's okay. As long as you know, firstly, that you recognize when it happens, you talk about it, and you kind of set an intention to not let it go on for too long. And then you have the skills that you need to get back into connection when you need to.
I love that you share that it's something that you guys also experience because I think often people think that those of us that are doing the work or we're out here like that we're perfect. And the reality is like we're still all on our own journeys and we still have our own experiences and we're not immune to these experiences. I always see memes about marriage coaches who are divorcing and, things like that. But it's like we all have our own shit.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's so important to be real about that because, again, it prevents us from creating this ideal that people can't live up to, that we can't live up to, and then we judge ourselves when it doesn't happen because that's so damaging. Like, I think it's something I'm really passionate about is kind of raising the bar, as it were, of what we think of marriage. Because I think marriage does have a really bad reputation in our culture. Like, there's the untrue statistic that 50% of marriages end in divorce. That's not true. It's never been true, but it's really strong in people's minds. I can come back to that in a bit if you want. Yeah. But also just this way of like talking about our partners, the old ball and chain, or like, the barbed remarks that we make about partners behind their back. Like the fact or the idea that somehow the longer you're together, the worse your relationship will get. And I don't believe that's true. And I think we can ask so much more of our relationships and expect so much more of our marriages and create something so much better than that. but also it does need to be real, that it does need to be space in that for moments of disconnection or awkward sex or periods of time where you're not having sex or conflict, right? Conflict is a part of any relationship, it can be healthy versus unhealthy, but you're never going to escape conflict. So I think a more robust belief or standard around marriage is really important.
Yeah. What's coming up for me when you say that is that for me in relationship, it has always felt like when there's conflict, the relationship ends. And learning how to work through conflict and how to work with, like, in relationship, like, everything changes. And you just have to, I don't want to say just go with the flow, but at the same time, like, communicate. And
Mm.
there are going to be sticky moments in relationship and partnership. And that doesn't mean that the relationship is over. You got to throw it out or you start over. It just means that you have to work through it
Mm.
potentially.
Conflict. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, there are some situations where like, no, the relationship has run its course and that's okay. And that's not necessarily a failure either. Like just because something ends doesn't mean it failed. And we seem to accept that in all areas of our life, except for relationships. Like if you leave a job, people don't go, oh my God, you failed at your job. You left. It's like, well, no, I wrapped that up. It had its season and now I'm ready for something else. We don't feel that way about relationships. But yeah, I mean, conflict is an opportunity for emotional intimacy because you have this ability, like what you're doing is you're sharing your perspective, which is different to your partner's perspective. And in that moment, it's uncomfortable. But if you're being radically honest, you are sharing your vulnerable truths with each other. You are doing that vulnerable self-disclosure. You're letting yourself be known in a more full way. And if you know how to navigate that, 9 times out of 10, you can get to the end of that conflict and feel closer than you were when you began the conversation. Like some of the most emotionally connected moments of my marriage have been at the end of an incredibly difficult conversation because we had something that was on our heart, on our minds that needed to be spoken about. And in doing so, we knew each other more deeply and we felt closer as a result. But yeah, it takes some skills. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think many of us are not taught with those skills either. We don't really have, or maybe never saw how to navigate conflict resolution in relationship growing up. Our parents, maybe you lived in a two-parent home or they didn't handle conflict. They just brushed it under the rug. And so reparenting ourselves to learn these skills to have healthy relationships is a challenge.
Yeah, it's so true. So true. Why these skills aren't taught in schools, I do not know. Because they are some of the most essential skills. Like something we can guarantee is you will experience conflict in one form or another in your lifetime, but we don't know how to handle that. I was reflecting on this the other day. It's like the closest we come to is like we do debating, maybe like the debate team, which is like the most adversarial, intense type of like stating your claim and just being in full conflict with another. We don't actually learn what it looks like to genuinely listen to someone else's perspective, to validate that even when it's different. We don't learn emotional intelligence and how to make sense of our own emotions. And so we're kind of stumbling around blind. And yeah, I mean, for me, conflict was a mess. I didn't see conflict modeled in my household because my parents were conflict avoidant, which on some levels is great. I never saw them fight. I mean, so many people I know, so many of my clients would give anything to have said, I never saw my parents fight, right? That for them, it's the complete opposite. However, the downside of never seeing my parents fight is I never had healthy conflict resolution modeled to me. So I learned conflict resolution from like watching soap TV. How do couples fight on the TV? And so for me, conflict was swearing, slamming the doors, shouting, like, threatening to leave, like just an absolute shit show. I really had no idea what it took to actually handle conflict. And I remember the first time Reese and I had a proper conflict and I think I told him to fuck off and he was like, no, like we don't do that here. We're gonna have to work on this. Like we can do better. And I realized I really did have to look at emotional intelligence. Like, what am I feeling? I had to understand my attachment style. I didn't know it, but I was avoidant attachment. And so I was like, all right, yep, we've got conflict. Fuck you. I don't need you. I'm fine. I'm leaving, right? Like, that was just my stock standard in how I dealt with conflict in a relationship. So for me, I really had to look at that because I don't think I could have a successful marriage unless I looked at that stuff.
Are you ready to start understanding yourself better, learning and recognizing your patterns, and really develop a relationship with yourself? If this sounds like you, the Unleashing My Power, a women's empowerment and gratitude journal is for you. This journal was specifically curated for women just like you to help you take back your power and develop and go to the next level in life. My friend Danielle and I created this journal because of our own experiences and what we were looking for in a daily practice to improve our connection to self and really become connected with ourselves. This is game changing, and the feedback that we are getting from other women who have started using this journal is absolutely amazing. You can find it on Amazon, or you can go to jordandannelle.com/journal and it'll take you right there. I hope you enjoy. Be sure to go snag yours right away and leave me a review. Tell us what you think about it. Slide in the DMs. I know that your life will change when you start using this journal. Do you feel like emotional intelligence is the same as emotional intimacy or like a component of emotional intimacy?
So emotional intelligence is a skill we have as individuals that helps us to do emotional intimacy better. Emotional intimacy is the experience, and it requires a number of different skills, and emotional intelligence is one of them.
There's so many skills I wish they taught in our school system, like emotional intelligence would be so helpful, or just all of these things that we talk about in the space that I talk more about in pleasure and sex. It's like there's so many conversations that we really need to be having at a younger age and not in our 30s and 40s and 50s, finally discovering these things and realizing like, oh shit, like there is a different way of living. Like I don't have to continue to live like this. And our children, well, for those of us who have kind of done the work and have children, our children are going to have that advantage, but future generations of children, like hopefully they have access to all of that or more access.
Yeah, the lack of knowledge, the lack of helpful skills creates so much unnecessary hurt and trauma and pain. Like something, I know you're really passionate about is pleasure education. And if we could imagine if we taught pleasure as a focus of sex as opposed to just abstinence, right? How much, I mean, consent is now being taught, which is wonderful. Like consent is very important. We still shy away from teaching teenagers the concept that sex might be pleasurable and you might have sex to feel good. And here's how you feel good. And here's how you masturbate. And here's how you might give a blowjob safely. And here's how you might give directions for, or like, it's like, oh, we can't talk to teens about that stuff. It's like, okay, good. So they'll just do it with no idea what they're doing. And they're going to do it in an unsafe way. They're going to do it in ways where they aren't enjoying it. Like, oh, that's better. Okay, sure. Like it's wild. It's wild.
Yeah, there's so much room for improvement. And slowly but surely, we're all making our effort at trying to make the difference for future generations. What do you feel like are some common barriers to emotional intimacy, and how do you overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, one of them is so tied up with the experience of emotional intimacy, like vulnerability. Like that is an essential ingredient, but it's also an obstacle because vulnerability inherently is really terrifying. That fear of revealing ourselves to someone and like, will they judge us? Will they still love us? Will they reject us? Will they laugh at us? Will they not understand? Like those awkward moments of misunderstanding are really painful and really lonely. And we've all had experiences of that disconnection, and we hold that social pain really closely, and we don't want to experience it again. We all learn coping mechanisms to prevent us from that painful experience of rejection and judgment. So what's really important to overcome that is that emotional safety. And emotional safety you can kind of think of as like a bank balance in your relationship. And it's something that you are constantly needing to make deposits into, right? You might have an argument and that's like a withdrawal, but you always want to be making sure that you're working towards creating emotional safety in your relationship. And there's so many ways you can do that: appreciating each other, celebrating each other, being there in the tough moments, helping with your partner's challenges, sharing the load. Like, all of these things show that, hey, I'm there for you. You can count on me. And that makes it much easier to open up. If you do think that your partner is not going to know how to be that receptive partner, then actively working on those skills together, like really teaching them, how do we do validation? How do we be good listeners? Getting support to upskill on that together so that you know they know what you are doing and what you want from them.
You know, something that I'm curious about is a lot of the listeners, I think, are single. And we talked about emotional intimacy and, creating that with friends and more platonic situations. But how would you be able to practice these skills before getting into partnership?
I mean, with your friends is the most wonderful, wonderful place. There was some research done on university students, research done on the polling of university students, where they asked about their relationships and their friendships. And they asked them like how close and connected they felt. And they found that the people who weren't revealing things about themselves, they weren't talking about themselves, felt lonely in their friendships, even though they technically had a lot of friends. Whereas those people who were talking about themselves, revealing things about themselves, felt like they had friendships and they felt close to those friends, even if they didn't have as many friends. And so this is a really important skill to practice with your friendships. And it's again about revealing yourself. And you can have those same upfront conversations with your friends and say, hey, something I want to practice is having deeper conversations with you so that like we really feel a sense of like connection, that we really understand and know each other deeply. And we can practice the skill of like sharing our truths and the things that are on our minds rather than trying to wear the mask and keep it all together and make it seem like we've got our shit sorted out when none of us do and we're all like freaking out on the inside, right? You can lean into those uncomfortable but incredibly connective, profound conversations with your friends. And again, it's important to, because whether you're in a relationship or not, like you need those types of connections regardless. Like you need to have people in your life, around like 5 or 6 people that you feel really close to and that you feel know you. And so you have to practice that skill as well.
I also feel like, talked about this recently with a guy that I'm dating, but women tend to have more friendships that have more emotional intimacy than men do. And that can be really challenging for them because they don't really have a lot of people that they can go to on a deeper, safer level. What type of advice would you give men?
Yeah. This is a heartbreaking phenomenon because we see this as well in our coaching practice. And my husband a lot as well. He works predominantly with men. I work predominantly with women, and together we work with couples. But yeah, this is a big problem for men. And I think it's part of the contributing factor why you hear that the suicide rate amongst men is so high in comparison to women. They don't feel like they have those close connections and people they can turn to. And a lot of it is how we socialize men and the stereotypes or the conditioning they have around what it means to be a man, which is don't have emotions, don't cry, don't have feelings, be strong. Like, boys don't cry. They're so drenched in that kind of messaging that they firstly don't feel their feelings. They've learned not to feel their feelings. Or if they do feel their feelings, they don't share them with anyone because they don't want to be seen as weak. And so the most courageous, terrifying, amazing thing that they can do is develop their emotional intelligence, get in touch with their feelings there's a variety of different techniques, but then to start sharing those with somebody, anybody in their life. And maybe to begin with, it's a female partner or a female friend, because maybe that feels safer. But eventually share those feelings with men as well, because you can guarantee that if you are feeling that kind of isolation, so are your male friends. And I often feel like men are just waiting for someone to sit down and be like, hey, let's have a real deep conversation. And once they get started, I mean, men's circles are incredible for this. If you're a man listening to this and you're wanting deeper connection, find a men's circle, because these are collections of men who are getting together and just talking about their feelings and breaking through these stereotypes. And it's beautiful, beautiful to witness and watch, because the truth is men want emotional connection just as much as women. They've just got stricter barriers and often less skills and less practice. But again, I say it's like riding a bike, but once you learn it, they're off. Yeah, like it's something that they crave just as much as women do.
What is your favorite way to get in touch with your emotional intelligence? I think you mentioned journaling earlier. Do you have any other thoughts as far as understanding your own emotions?
Yeah, a really simple hack is just to start naming them. So the Gottmans have a really amazing resource called the Feelings Wheel, which is just a wheel of emotions. And it kind of starts in the middle with the big emotions that we can probably all identify: mad, sad, happy. But then they kind of break off into all of the little intricate variations of that. And the more you're able to name those emotions, the wider your vocabulary, the more awareness that you have. If you don't have the language for something, you often don't have the understanding of it. That's kind of how our brain works. It's like once we name something, we can start to grapple with it and experience it. So that's incredibly helpful. Just expand your vocabulary and then start trying to name your feelings in a more precise way. Incredibly, incredibly simple, but really powerful.
That wheel is so amazing. I use that, and I have a journal that I use to identify my emotions. And that was one of the key parts for me, is I didn't know where to start when it came to naming my emotions. So I pulled up this wheel, and every morning I'd sit with this wheel and be like, okay, well, where the fuck am I on here today?
Yeah.
Because I didn't have the vocabulary to start naming emotions, and still working on it. I'm sure, like all of us, we're all still working on something through this process. I want to circle back though to, you were talking about the divorce rate not actually being 50%. Tell me more.
Yes, I'm glad you circled back to that. So this statistic started back when baby boomers were kind of going through a divorce rampage. So the generation with the highest rate of divorce are baby boomers. And there was a time, I'm not sure when, it maybe the 90s, I can't remember when, where they're getting lots of divorces. And so technically the divorce rate was rising. And research has said if the rate is to increase at this same rate, in 5 years we'll be at 50%. But that never happened. It never actually reached 50%. And in fact, it's now falling. And millennials are bringing that divorce rate down, partly because we're not getting married as much, but that's only a small part of the equation. We are also not getting divorced at the same rate as baby boomers. Now, of course, there's a time lag here. Time will tell. But all of the research and trends suggest that millennials, because we wait longer to get married, because we tend to be more highly educated, because we are more open to preventative therapy and counseling. We seek, and this is the same for Gen Z, they seek out preventative support, mental health support, counseling, premarital counseling, therapy more than the baby boomers ever did, that we are really genuinely bringing that divorce rate down. The other thing about that divorce rate is that it captures both first marriages and second, third, fourth, fifth marriages. And so there's a real skewing of that figure, because you have people who, once they've had a second divorce, your risks of getting divorced are much, much higher. And so for a first marriage, your risk of divorce is very different to a third marriage. So for a first marriage, I believe it's somewhere around 70%. And again, 70% of marriages stay together. The divorce rate's probably around 30%. So that number is coming down. And I think it's important that we don't keep perpetuating this idea that, oh, it's 50-50, because of this like quite nihilist view of like, oh, it's a coin flip, like why get married because it's a coin flip. But for people who want to get married, it's definitely not the be all and end all for everyone. It's an option. It's a valid option. It's one that I personally love. But there are a lot of valid reasons and a lot of benefits to marriage. But people are often showing up in even our practice where they're really scared because they've heard this statistic. And it's hard to make that commitment when you think and culture's telling you like, oh yeah, it's a coin flip. Chances are you won't stay together. Whereas it's a much more hopeful scenario than that.
That's very reassuring, because I did not realize that it wasn't as high as society makes it seem it for it to be. And definitely reassuring as somebody who does eventually desire a marriage and ideally does not get divorced. I mean, nobody goes into marriage wanting a divorce, but at the end of the day, like, shit happens and you do what you got to do. But I love that. So I would love to get into our kink of the week segment and share a kink that you are familiar with. So I'm just going to let you share a little bit about your kink of the week.
Yes. So my kink of the week is sploshing. So this falls under the category of like the wet and messy kinks, but sploshing specifically is food play. And it's something that we've maybe all tried in some small degree, like bringing strawberries into the bed or like a little bit of chocolate or something like that, putting chocolate in our partner's body. But sploshing is taking that concept and turning it all the way up. And so often it's like laying out a big tarp and like throwing cakes at each other or like completely covering your partner's body in honey and really like luxuriating in the sensations of that. And what I love about sploshing is that it's kind of the essence of sex as play. So this is a concept I think Esther Perel talks about, like sex is adult play. And part of what we can do to capture our eroticism is incorporating more play into our sex life. And whilst we don't necessarily have to go like all in on sploshing, like full transparency, like I have an incredibly vanilla sex life, despite what people think. Like as a relationship and intimacy coach, my sex life is definitely vanilla, but I liked like sprinkle, like to experiment with things. And so sploshing light is something that I think is really easy for people to bring into their sex life. And what I mean by sploshing light is like, yeah, bringing in food items where they can play with sensations. Like, what does it feel like to take whipped cream and to rub that over your arms and body? What does it feel like to put that on your breasts? What is it like to smear melted chocolate, warm melted chocolate, down your partner's face? And it's such a nice way to play with sensation, to have fun, to not take sex too seriously. And it really captures, I think, some of that innocence and play that sex can be.
It's so important that we talk about sex being play, because that's really what it is. Like it is our time to have fun, play, get curious, and explore. And it doesn't need to be super rigid and, this is what we do. This is how we do it every time we do it. Like that's not the intention behind it, unless that's what you want to make of it, but that's really not the intention behind it. And so being able to just play and try new things and explore and, like I said, be curious. I love that. Well, this conversation has been really, really insightful. And I am so glad that you were able to join me to talk about emotional intimacy. Before we wrap up, I would love to hear, how do you define pleasure?
Pleasure for me is feeling good in our body and feeling good in our mind. And they're both highly connected. Our body is part of our mind is part of our body. They're really not separable. But yeah, it's this birthright that we all have, or this potential that we all have to feel good. And I think it's something that maybe we forget to do in the busyness of life and the tendency that we have to always be planning into the future and to be thinking 5 steps ahead and to be, avoiding the dangers that are potentially coming down the road or ruminating on the past. Pleasure is a way for us to simply be here in this moment and to savor the incredible experience of being alive. And that can be through sex. Sex is one of the most wonderful ways to experience pleasure, but it can also be listening to a beautiful song. It can be looking at a beautiful sunset. It can be walking with your bare feet on the earth. And it's something that is accessible to all of us and is nourishing to all of us.
Yes, I love that definition. That's such a beautiful definition, and I resonate very deeply with that one. Where can the listeners find you at?
Best place to find us is at our blog, practicalintimacy.com. And there you'll find a number of different articles about emotional intimacy, how to have emotionally connected sex, how to have more passionate sex, how to handle conflict, all kinds of free resources. You'll also find a free quiz to help you find your intimacy style. So to understand, are you the kind of person that will crave emotional intimacy first before all other things? Are you the kind of person who will crave sexual intimacy before all other things? Are you the kind of person who will crave intellectual intimacy before all other things? So you can work out your intimacy style there at the blog. And then you'll also find an array of courses. So we have a course to help couples deepen their conversations and learn those skills of emotional intimacy. So the Connection Cure. We also have a course designed to help couples manage differences in sexual desire, reignite your love life. So understanding what to do when you're potentially wanting sex more than your partner or they're struggling with low desire. How can you get on the same page and manage that together and take away the shame and blame and that toxic pattern we can get stuck in? And then we also have a course on communication skills. So conflict to connection, which is about how you can move through those difficult conversations to get to the connection on the other side. So again, you'll find all of those on practicalintimacy.com.
Ooh, I love that. Be sure to go check out their blog, and those resources sound phenomenal. Can't wait to go take a look at them myself. So thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure, Jordan. Thank you for having me. This has been a really interesting, fun, deep conversation.
This podcast is sponsored by Intimacy Coaching by Jordan Donnell. Have you ever desired more from your sex life, or feel like you're having good sex but curious about how to make it even better? Are you desiring a deeper, intimate connection with yourself? Or maybe you are dealing with desire and arousal concerns or struggling with communicating your desires with your partner. If you're hearing this and thinking, that might be me, and you're curious to learn a bit more, let's chat. I would love to talk with you more to see if working with me is a good fit for you. To learn more about intimacy coaching with Jordan Donnell, go to coaching.jordandonnell.com. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Thank you for joining today and continuing to bring awareness to women's health. If you love the show, please subscribe so you never miss another episode, and leave a review for others to see. If you want to see me on the daily, you can check out my bio for links to all my pages. Be sure to share this episode with your girlfriends. Thanks again, and see you next episode.